Councillor Harris, it's Helen Snell. I can confirm that we are now live. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this virtual meeting of Cornwall Council's Audit Committee. Before consideration of today's business, I will outline the protocols for the meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed to the public via Microsoft Teams and is also being recorded. Where members are speaking, they may choose to use their video. If the Council's live stream fails during the meeting and we cannot share the proceedings, I will adjourn the meeting so that access can be restored. If the issue cannot be resolved, I will halt the meeting and the remaining business will be concluded at a future date. If a member experiences a technical issue, I will adjourn for a short period to try to re-establish their connection. As I call members to speak, I will remind you, if I remember, to switch on your microphone. If for some reason you cannot be heard, the democratic officer will advise you. Votes will be taken by roll call and the result announced by the Democratic Services Officer. Where a member has declared a non-registrable interest, a disclosable pecuniary interest, or an interest by virtue of any trade union membership in a matter, they must leave the virtual meeting. Their departure will be confirmed and they will be invited to rejoin the meeting at the appropriate time. To confirm the proceeding of today's meeting is that committee members who wish to speak on an item should indicate by typing an X in the chat box. Before we start today's business, I will ask the Democratic Services Officer, Helen Snell, to confirm members and officers' attendance. Helen, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harris. If I could confirm members and officers' attendance, if you could just give your name and the division and or your job role. Thank you. So, Councillor Harris.
David Harris, Truro Trehaven.
Thank you. And Councillor Desmond.
Philip Desmond, Poulin Tahidi, Vice Chair Audit.
Thank you. And Councillor Ekin-Smith.
David Egan-Smith, Councillor for 11.
And Councillor Kenny.
Good morning, Joanna Kenny, Newquay Pentire.
Thank you. And Councillor LeBroy.
Peter LeBroy, Bute Division.
Thank you. And Councillor Visco.
Bert Visco, Busco and Truro.
Thank you. And Councillor Wood.
John Wood, Councillor for Roach Division.
Thank you. And Councillor Jordan.
Yeah, Barry Jordan, Tintagel Division.
Thank you. And Councillor Edgerton.
Bob Edgerton, Probus, Tregony and Grandpound.
Thank you. And then we've got our co-optees, Jeff Ring.
Good morning. Jeff Ring, Independent Co-optive member.
Thank you. And Chris Butters.
Good morning, Chris Butters, Independent Lay Member.
Thank you. And now if I can turn to our officers, Tracy Langley.
Hi there, Tracy Langley. I'm the Council's Chief Operating Officer and Section 151 Officer, which is the Director of Finance. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mel O'Sullivan.
Hi, good morning everybody. My name is Melanie O'Sullivan. I'm the Service Director for Assurance and Monitoring Officer.
Thank you. And Holly Sykes.
Good morning everyone. Holly Sykes, Head of Internal Audit.
And Russell Ashman.
Good morning, Russell Ashman, Head of Pensions, Treasury and Technical.
Thank you. And Mike Harris.
Morning, Mike Harris, Chief Finance Accountant.
Thank you. And then we have our external auditors, Paul Dossett.
Paul Dossett, partner from Grant Thornton.
Thank you. And Jerry Daly.
Geraldine Daly, Audit Lead for Cornwall, Grant Thornton.
Thank you. I can also see on our meeting today we have Councillor Martin Eddy. Councillor Eddy, are you there and want to introduce yourself? Okay, Councillor Eddy is on the call as well, but I'm not sure if he's got any issues, but he's not a member of the audit committee, but he is listening. Okay, thanks.
Okay, are we done there?
Yes, thank you, Chairman.
Right, apologies for absence. I think we have none. Is that correct?
Chairman, it's Helen Snell. I've got apologies from Councillor Ethorne Gibbons, who normally sits in on our audit committee meetings.
Right. Anybody else?
No.
Yes, David, Chair, I can only stay until 1 o'clock and will give my apologies from that point onwards if the meeting is still in session.
Thank you, Councillor LeBroy. We might be done by 1 o'clock. I certainly hope we are. Anybody else? Any early departures? Chris Butters, you have your hand up.
Yes, I have a dental appointment later, so I'll be leaving around 11:15 with apologies.
Right, thank you. Okay, any declarations of interest, please? I'll take that as a no. Okay, the first substantive item, appointment of independent lay audit committee member. Holly Sykes, are you going to take this matter forward, please?
Yes, certainly. Holly Sykes, Head of Internal Audit. So this report is in respect of our lay members and the appointment of one of them. It seeks approval for the Audit Committee to carry out a recruitment process in order to appoint a lay member on the completion of the term of a current lay member in April 2021. And that an appointments panel comprising of 3 Audit Committee members, including the chairman of the committee, be established to undertake a recruitment process, and that the authority can be delegated to the appointments panel to select the most suitable candidate for the role and to make recommendations to the council for approval of that appointment. The membership and terms of reference of the audit committee are reflected within the council's constitution, which makes provision for the audit committee to have lay members, independent to the authority, as non-voting independent lay members on the committee. This reflects a belief that these independent members provide a further check and balance to the council, as well as adding value to the work of the audit committee. The appointment of independent lay members is also seen as good practice, consistent with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy guidance, and more recently, the Redmond Review. I'm also drawing your attention to the need to formalise the reappointment of Jeff Ring as a non-voting independent lay member of the audit committee until the 28th of April 2021. This is for the remainder of what would have been a further 2-year term for Mr. Ring, had the irrelevant confirmation been sought in April 2019, thus bringing us in line with the Constitution. Is that clear?
It's clear to me. Does anybody want to comment? I would just comment, I think independent lay members provide a very, very useful addition to this committee. And I think we're all grateful to them. Councillor Kenny, you put your hand up and a cross in the box.
Yeah, all these buttons. Right, just to say, obviously, I totally support reappointing or formally appointing Jeff. When you say appointing a committee, presumably we're not going to do it in April, since the audit committee is likely to change in May. So this is actually a recommendation for the first action of the audit committee in the new council.
I think we want to get this done now, and it's pretty politically neutral. I don't see it being offensive.
So I've misunderstood. So actually, what you're saying is we're going to appoint we are going to start the recruitment now, yes, before the next council comes in, to attend at the next council.
Yes, please.
Right. Okay.
And indeed, on that subject, if I can have 2 volunteers from the current committee to join me on a selection panel, please shout now.
I did it last time. Very happy to do it again.
Thank you.
One more, Chairman, if you like.
Sorry, was that Councillor Biscoe?
Yeah.
Okay, then if nobody else wants to volunteer, I'm quite happy. I've now got my selection committee of Harris, Kenny and Biscoe. And if there are no more comments, can we go for the recommendations, please? Helen, do I need to read them out in full?
Or you can just state as per the report.
Recommendations as per the report. Recommendations 1, 2 and 3. Can I ask for a proposer?
Proposed.
Second.
Councillor Kenny, Councillor Biscoe second. Helen, if we can go to the vote.
Thank you, Chairman. If I can remind members they are voting for, against or abstaining. So Councillor Harris.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Biscoe.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Desmond.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Edgerton.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Ekinsmith.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Jordan.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Kenny.
For.
Thank you. Councillor LeBroy.
For.
Thank you. And Councillor Wood.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. That's carried.
Thank you. Okay, we move on to the main business of the day, agenda item 4, which is the statement of accounts for 2019-20. In terms of how we deal with this, what I'd like us to do, we've got the GT reporting first and the statement of accounts second in the pack. And I'd like us to look at the items somewhat separately, otherwise we're going to get lost jumping between pages. So we have the GT report first. Can I just comment on the recommendations? There are 5 recommendations, which we'll read out in full quickly. 1, the statement of accounts, including the pension fund accounts for Cornwall Council, is approved. 2, Grant Thornton's audit findings report for Cornwall Council for 2019-20 is noted, and the management actions proposed in response to their recommendations are endorsed. 3, Grant Thornton's audit findings report for Cornwall Pension Fund for 2019-20 is noted, and the management actions proposed in response to their recommendations are endorsed. 4, and I would like to propose a change to this when we get to it, but I'll raise it now. So it would read as follows, and I'm adding words rather than taking words away. The letter of management representation for Cornwall Council and for Cornwall Pension Fund for 2019-20 are approved for signing by the Council's Chief Operating Officer and the Chair of the Audit Committee, with the Audit Committee taking assurance from the reports and, I can't read my own writing here, information received from officers. I think it's not fair on the Audit Committee to ask it to approve a detailed letter of management rep without noting that we take great comfort and assurance from what the officers do. And then the 5th recommendation, the going concern statement to be signed by the Council's Chief Operation Officer, Section 151 officer, is noted. Obviously, we'll come back to recommendations at the end, but I just wanted to read them out at the start. And if now we can go to the GT reports, I'm not sure whether Jerry Daly or Paul Dossett you're going to do these.
Thank you, Chairman. I will start, and then Geraldine will take us through the detail. So just to start off with, I think there's an important part of context to this report. In the members who attended the training session earlier, Mike Harris set out both the framework for sets of accounts, but also the context for this year's audit, and the complexity of it, working remotely for the vast majority of the audit, and in a regulatory regime that has changed and stiffened over the past couple of years. The deadline was pushed back to November the 30th, and probably when I looked at that, that decision was made by CLG in April, I think, and I thought, well, that looks quite a reasonable deadline. As I speak today, on November the 18th, of Grant Thornton's 197 local authority and associated body audits, we have signed 14, and that's 12 days before the deadline, and that just reflects both the challenge of working remotely, which has been very, very difficult, and the regulatory regime. And the regulatory regime put in place by the FRC, who are our regulators, focuses very, very much on the big numbers in the accounts, and those big numbers that are based on estimates. So the two that I particularly draw to your attention, and Geraldine will take us through the detail, are asset valuations and pension issues, particularly the former, actually, but they're both key parts of that process. And the FRC are very, very keen that the auditors focus on these issues in a great amount of detail.
Can I interrupt you just for a second? FRC is Financial Reporting Council, a regulator.
A regulator. They regulate all the firms who do this work, and as a large council, which is those that spend over 500 million, we are subject to the FRC processes. Smaller councils are subject to a slightly different regulatory regime. so they require us to focus on those particular areas. Personal view is the auditors, and we'll come on to the value for money bit. My personal view is the value for money bit is actually in these challenging times the most important bit of our work in reality. And members will be well aware, I hope, about the recent public interest reports in Nottingham and Croydon, and I think that they're quite good examples of the auditor focusing on serious issues of real money that impact on taxpayers and the role of members very, very strongly. So they're important reports in my view that demonstrate the value of external audit. But coming back to Cornwall specifically, Cornwall ticks a number of boxes in respect of complexity, size, a very large council, group structure, which is inevitably quite complex, and different accounting requirements and different contexts for the companies in the group, and obviously a very large portfolio of assets. So not just the sort of straightforward civic buildings and HRA, but a number of other assets as well, and obviously the airport, the Tamar Bridge are two that come to mind immediately. So a very, very complex audit, which we are hopefully drawing to an end, but has been very challenging both for the finance team and for us. And the majority of adjustments that you'll see in our report or reported in our report, we do really reflect not the bottom line impact, which would be very serious, but the impact of valuations. So I'll leave Geraldine to come on to that. We are closing the audit out. We are near to finishing, not quite there yet, and Geraldine will take us through the detail. And then obviously the pair of us will be happy to take questions from members after Geraldine has finished her presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chair. If I can just take you to page 19, which is the start of the headline messages in our report. So I think it's 21, but my page 19. And it might be reflected on the challenges of the audit. Paul's just reflected again. And I think it's probably an important context to set the scene as we go through the detail of the audit findings report. There are a lot of findings in here, and you will see that there are a lot of recommendations to management, etc., which management have accepted and responded to. And I won't go through those particular recommendations in detail, but the important thing I think in terms of assurance to members of the audit committee is the big items, those that we have to concentrate on, valuations, property, plant and equipment, the pension liability, etc., have all been audited and challenged. Those are the big numbers in your accounts, and we are satisfied that they are now materially correct. So as Paul's just mentioned, work is ongoing. At the time of writing, there were a number of items that were still outstanding, and I just want to give members an update in terms of those. So on page 20, you'll see on the right-hand side a list of those items. We focus quite heavily on going concern, and probably quite rightly, and pick that up in our work under value for money, as well as separate work under going concern. And this year we had to focus quite significantly on future cash flows for the council and the assumptions that a council are making. It will come as no surprise to members that COVID-19 has got an impact as we move forward in 2021 and particularly 21-22. And that work is complete and there are no issues there. We're still discussing with management the accounting treatment for inventory, and that isn't to say that the 24 million on your balance sheet is incorrect or materially incorrect. No, it isn't. We are just tying up some loose ends in terms of what the future holds for that inventory balance. But I'd like to probably draw your attention to a lot of commentary in the audit findings report, which is unique this year around Cornwall Airport. And at the time of writing, there was a lot of discussion happening between us, management, the auditors of Cornwall Airport and Cornwall Airport directors themselves. So given the situation that COVID brought us earlier in the year, and of course now we know that the airport has had to close again in the second lockdown, We amended our audit strategy on the group in particular to take a step back and consider the implications of the going concern for Cornwall Airport. We don't normally ask for assurances from the subsidiary auditor, Bishop Fleming, on this airport because to the group it isn't material. It's kind of net position is about 3-4 million. But and we still don't need to ask for assurances around the airport and its going concern. But what we have done with management, with Bishop Fleming, and internally at Grant Thornton is considered the impact of the accounts for Cornwall Airport and the accounts for CorServe not being signed. And Grant Thornton have come to the conclusion that given the Cornwall Airport isn't material, it doesn't impact on your group opinion that we will issue when we finish the audit. So there is no impact on the opinion as a result of Cornwall Airport's accounts not being signed. They're not material. What you do have, though, is a whole load of assets sitting on your balance sheet, which are related to Cornwall Airport, circa 60 million pounds if you include hangars, runways, etc. And at the beginning, we were talking about the challenges that obviously everybody's faced around COVID-19. And what we are recommending is that management enhance their material uncertainty note within their accounts. You will see that note within your accounts. Enhance that to draw attention to the reader that Cornwall Airport is in the position it is in, and that Cornwall Council do have a number of assets sitting on the balance sheet, and just to draw out the fact that the valuer has put a material uncertainty on the valuation of property, plant and equipment. And indeed, Cornwall Airport's assets should also have that highlighted. So those are kind of the big particular areas before I go into some of the other items that we've tested to provide you with assurances. In relation to the material uncertainties within your accounts, our audit opinion will refer to those particular material uncertainties. We call that an emphasis of matter. So management highlight the issues in the accounts, the auditor highlights the issue in the accounts in the audit opinion. Not a qualification, it's an emphasis of matter, drawing attention to the reader by the auditor that these particular items have been impacted by something, and in this year it's COVID-19. So in terms of the key messages and some of those big numbers within your accounts, as I've just mentioned, we've talked a lot, Mike talked a lot, we're going to probably talk a lot around valuation of land and buildings. And on page 26, you will see the type of work that we have had to do this year. Yes, you are complex, you've got lots of various types of assets. And one of the particular areas we have focused on is council housing and dwellings in particular. And you'll see the type of work we've done. We've had to employ various experts of our own. So management have their own valuers and their experts. Grant Thornton and as auditors, we've had to employ our own experts to check the work of your experts and provide us with assurances around the assumptions made. Ultimately, these are estimates, and estimates always make regulators slightly uneasy, and they are big numbers within your accounts. So you'll see the extent of the type of work that we've had to do, and you will also see the errors that have been identified as a result of our testing. And later on in the report, you will see the decisions made by management to adjust. So, for instance, the 16 million relating to your HRA dwellings has quite rightly been adjusted given the enormity of the figure and the fact that materiality is 17 million. And there have been other items that have been found that management haven't decided to amend because they quite frankly are not material. And Chair, when you talk about the letter of representation, attached to that will be all the unadjusted items that you need to be happy still do not need to be adjusted. You know, that's one of the assurances that we as auditors require back from you as chair. The other big number within your accounts is the pension fund liability. And on page 28, in terms of the findings, we've suggested here at the time of writing, we were still waiting for some items from the actuary, That isn't the case anymore. We have everything we need and can conclude that that particular large estimate within your accounts is materially accurate. And then we go on to talk about the significant findings in terms of our group audit work. So we liaise really closely with the subsidiary auditor, and it's pleasing to say we have got a very good relationship with them. It's transparent and open. We rely on the auditor's work on Cormac Solutions and Cornwall Housing because those are what we call the significant components. They are the ones that if there was anything to go wrong in terms of their accounts would impact on our work and our opinion on the group within your accounts. And there are no issues. There are no issues that would impact on our work or our opinion. So I'm happy to stop there in terms of the actual accounts themselves before I go on to the value for money work.
Jerry, I think it might be more useful if you unless sorry, Councillor Edison, you've got your hand up. I would actually rather go through your report in total before dealing with questions. But Councillor Edison, do you want to raise a point now? Bob, are you there? We've lost him. Jerry, carry on.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Thank you. Page 41 is the start of our value for money work and the summary of our work. You may recall back in June when we presented our audit plan, we highlighted to members then that there were 3 particular areas we wanted to look at. One was the financial sustainability and the medium-term financial planning of the council. 2 was around the governance and the decision-making process in relation to the establishment of Treveth LLP, because it's new and it's a different type of organisation that the council has set up. And lastly, to reflect actually on the management arrangements in place to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. And by that, what we meant was the arrangements in place to distribute grants, etc., and all the hard work that the council has had to do as a result of COVID-19 and central government's requirements to have Cornwall administering various things, but also the impact that has in terms of your finances. So 3 and 1 are very, very much interlinked. The details for the following 3 or 4 pages on the financial sustainability are clear. A lot of figures are quoted that I'm sure will resonate with members of the audit committee. This isn't anything that you don't know about. In terms of the audit opinion for the value for money conclusion, we're proposing a clean opinion. There are no issues that would prevent us from doing that. However, what we have done is draw your attention to some of the important messages that your Chief Operating Officer in particular is highlighting around the changes in the budget setting process, the transformation around financing, etc., all of which are crucial for the sustainability of the council over the next 12, 18, 24 months. And one important element that we have drawn to members' attention is obviously the level of reserves, and you've got a nice graph there. And I just reflect on some of the recommendations we, as Grant Thornton, have made as your auditors over the last 4 or 5 years, suggesting that genuine fund balance does not dip too low, because that is your balance that you need when there's a crisis, and what's happened this year. You know, Paul's talked about the public interest reports from Croydon, etc. This really is an important time in terms of local government finances, and something like a general fund that keeps you buoyant and keeps it at a certain level is absolutely crucial, in our view, to maintain for the future sustainability of the council. We also then go on to quite a lot of detail around the governance and review of the governance arrangements of Treveth, and have made a series of recommendations to Treveth and to the owners board as well, all of which have been agreed by management. And then finally, just commentary around COVID-19. We believe there's been sound arrangements in place in terms of reacting proactively to the pandemic, and also just highlighting some of the challenges that the council now faces as a result of the impact on finances. Chair, I have finished now in terms of the value for money work, but we're more than happy to take any questions, Paul and I. What I would do before we do that is just refer you to the action plan in Appendix A, which highlights the recommendations that we have made to management and management's responses, and in particular around the adjusted items in Appendix C. For transparency, those are the items that have been adjusted, and also those items that haven't been adjusted. As I said there, those are important items when you come to finally sign your letter of representation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'll take questions now. I think Councillor Edgerton, you put a cross in the box earlier. Do you now have a question?
Yeah, can you hear me this time?
Yes.
Oh, good, right. So I've got an intermittent problem with the microphone. Yeah, my questions were on pages 63 to 67 on those audit adjustments. And I've got 2 or 3 specific questions. And once you've answered those, I just want to come back with a more general point on there. So on page 63, you refer to one item, which was an asset, which was mistakenly put in as 6,000 square meters instead of 80 square meters. So that popped up in the spreadsheet, and an asset value of £16 million. What was the name of that building? Because that just seems so fundamental that somebody flicking through a list, if they saw something with a value of 16 million, should think, hang on, that's just a little garage somewhere. How is that worth 16 million? It seems incredible that one should slip through the net. So have you got an answer as to which that was specifically? That's the first one. The second one was on the HRA, where we've got adjustments, and I couldn't quite work out that we've agreed to one adjusted of 16.8 million, but then on page 64, but then on page 66, there's an additional 5.5 which haven't been adjusted. So I just wanted to, clarify that one. And the other one was the Tamar Bridge, which you've upped the value by £3 million. Now, it would be helpful if you told us what the actual figure was, because did you up it from 10 million to 13 million, or from 100 million to 103 million, or from 200 million to 203 million? Because, to be frank, all of us could probably put a figure on the Tamar Bridge to within £3 million. But just if you could answer those, please.
Thank you, Councillor. I can't tell you at the moment what asset is the one that had its square meterage entered in wrongly, but I can get back to you on that. In terms of the adjustments, yes, so on page 64, the valuation for HRA dwellings, large adjustment made there, and that is because it's very, very close to materiality. I think management, whether Russell or Mike are around, may want to answer the question around why 5 million hasn't been amended. And as you'll see in there, the reason for not adjusting is because that item is not material. So unless Russell wants to add to that, 16.8 is very, very high. If, for instance, that hadn't been adjusted, adding together all the other unadjusted items, Councillor, that would have taken us over materiality and would impact on the type of opinion you would receive. The 5.5, as I said, is not material, but I don't know if management wants to comment on that.
Hi, Chair. It's Russell Ashman, Head of Pensions and Treasury. I will respond to that. One of the reasons we haven't adjusted is that was a later finding by the external auditors in their work. We drew a line at a certain point in time where we made all the adjustments that had been found to ensure that we managed to get these papers updated and complete and dispatched to you on time. Therefore, as this item is immaterial, we have not adjusted for it as it was a late finding.
Thank you.
Tamar Bridge?
In terms of the Tamar Bridge had to be fully revalued this year, so that's why there's a little bit more focus on it than in previous years. I believe, again, management may correct me, I believe that the actual value of the asset is around 120 million.
So really 3 million, you can't possibly be, know that it's 123 million, not 120 million. That just seems crazy to be adjusting 120 million up or down by 3 million. Okay.
Agreed.
All right. Okay. The other point I wanted to make, it was on that table. There's a bit of a mess in it, in that the headings say pounds, thousands on each column, but the figures aren't pounds, thousands. Further, they seem to be actual pounds, except that you've got commas and decimal points wrong. So the first one says minus 17,715 million, which is minus 17 billion. But actually it should be minus 17.715 million. And you've made that mistake by putting in commas instead of decimal points all down those figures. And they're not thousands, so you've got this mishmash of figures, which are basically incorrect. And sorry, but I just thought you ought to be getting those right, or really sorting them out. This is a draft, so hopefully you will sort those out and either put them all in pounds, or all put them in thousands of pounds, or put them in millions of pounds, and be consistent through the table. The other point is on the bottom of the adjusted misstatements, you come to a total of minus 3.354 million. When I add them up, it comes to minus 4.354 million. And I've checked it several times, and that seems to be wrong. So could you check that?
Yeah, we do. And
also on the not adjusted misstatements, you've got a total of minus 10.037 million. No, sorry, you've got a total of minus 8.535 million. I cannot get to that figure in any way. When I add them up, it comes to minus 10.037 million. So could you check those? And then furthermore, finally, the last one, sorry, is below the 8.535, you've got 6.607. And so minus 8.535, by my reckoning, comes to minus 1.928, not minus 2.028. So, sorry, but those, that's sort of, primary school arithmetic. So please correct those before you finalise these. But
will do. Thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Edgerton, I think you're not the only one to pick up some inconsistencies here, some issues with numbering. You were the first to get the shot in, and congratulations on your detail. Sorry, can I just ask? It's a follow on from this. Actually, I'm not jumping on questions. When we got to it's on page 63, and this mess up putting something in at £16 million that was worth 2 and 6. I've got a question as to why there isn't something within the council system that picks up a mistake like this. It's a mistake. Anybody can make a mistake, but when it throws something out so off, it's one for officers to think about, please. But it's so off that it should have been seen automatically and not left the auditors to pick it up. Because I presume when the auditors pick a mistake like that up, they then end up looking at a lot more stuff. And having to spend more time looking at stuff because they can't see that there are any internal checks. I don't know if anybody wants to pick it up now or pick it up later. It's more of an observation.
Well, I will pick it up, Chair. Russell Ashman again. Yes, I think we were, and the valuer who did the work, were disappointed that this did not get spotted through their normal QA process. They've now changed their process significantly to ensure that such an error doesn't occur in the future. I also would say that perhaps some of this is that some of the QA processes that we operate were impacted by COVID and people working remotely, particularly during that earlier period of COVID where there was a lot of confusion around and people were perhaps not as focused as they normally would have been. But yes, we've taken that on board, and then the person who runs the valuation department has agreed and has actually already implemented the changes to ensure that our QA process is more robust going forward.
Thank you. Right, can I go on with questions? Councillor Biscoe, I think you're next.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good morning, Jerry. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you, Bert. How are you?
As well as can be expected for a man who zooms too much. I wanted to ask three very relatively brief questions. The first one is about the airport. Much of the assets at the airport have been funded through ERDF and other means, but that mainly. And I'm thinking actually about the runway, not to mention some of the hangars. And then, of course, there is the issue about all the industrial land, some of which is developed and others which is not, and who's responsible for that in terms of the asset base. I just wonder if, in looking at the going concern and the issue of going concern, I mean, if we got to a point where there was a failure of Cornwall Airport Limited, are there clawback requirements within the grant agreements on some of those assets that would actually affect the nature of going concern? So, I mean, and also because we happen to be withdrawing from the European Union, sadly, the clawback issues, I'm not sure what status they will have contractually once we get to January the 1st.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Biscoe. Tracy might, yeah, she might have a better answer. I can't remember. We have audited the ERDF claims over the years. I personally can't remember if there's any clawback issues in there, but your Chief Operating Officer might know.
Sorry, Tracy Langley has a hand up, as does Russell. Perhaps so one of you wants to comment on that specific question. Tracy?
I'll let Russell do that then.
Russell? Russell, are you there?
I'll take it, Chair. So I think all of the ERDF grants will have different conditions on them for clawback, and if there was such an event that the airport is not a going concern anymore, we would seek to then review what we would use it for and then what we did with the assets, and as part of that review we would look at the conditions of the ERDF grant.
So in terms of that, then part of the risks around going concern ought to have those potential clawback provisions included. Is that right?
Yeah, it would be part of the review. Yeah, it would be part of the number of risks that we have against the going concern. Yeah.
So moving on, I'm interested on page 31, which is about council housing, that you've got a valuation of just over £500 million on the council housing, and you talk about the social discount, and in the paragraph over the page on 32, you're talking about the transfer of £7 million worth of property, and that the asset values for those houses are overstated by 4.8 because of the social discount. I'm just interested to know if what in terms of the valuation of the housing, the 555 million, is that a calculation made to include the social discount, or is the social discount net of that figure? So in other words, is that a true statement including social discount, or is it an overstatement?
So, Councillor Biscoe, the social discount for social housing is applied to the gross value of your council dwellings. So the 500 odd million is net of the 35%. The issue we had was those items that have been transferred over from inventory stock being built to your HRA, your dwellings, your place where the dwellings go, hadn't had the 35% applied to them. So that's gross. So there's kind of two things going on there.
So the 555 is net.
Net.
Yeah, right. Okay. All right. That's good. And then the last point, is that you say in your value for money stuff about Treveth, and that members need to understand the governance issues because it's an LLP and they're not used to that. Could I make the suggestion that recommendation actually has something added to it, and that is that the training should be mandatory for all members, so that the whole council understands the governance mechanism rather than a small number who are associated with a scrutiny committee or whatever it is, so that everybody understands. I think that would be helpful.
Tracy, do you want to comment on that?
Well,
yes, thank you. We've had. So if I can tell you what we're doing from an officer's perspective, and then Jerry can come in off the back of that, if that's okay. So we've discussed this with the auditors significantly, and I think I don't disagree with you, Councillor Biscoe, that there is something about the different types of training that we need for all of members and for officers on how the structures of our companies work generally. And that's not just about Treveth, it's about all of our companies because they operate differently and separately. So as a result of the report that Jerry's team has delivered, we will be reviewing the governance arrangements and the training arrangements as a result, and we will make sure that there is something for all members.
Yeah, no, I think that's really helpful. I think that it's important that the whole council understands the way in which the council is now structured and the details of the group before they get to a point of being nominated to go on what committees they go on to. So I think it should be part of the induction and refreshed from time to time.
I agree.
Sorry, the monitoring officer has her hand up. Is it on this point, Mel?
Yes, Chairman, if that's okay. It was really just to assure, so it's in morning everybody, Melanie O'Sullivan, Service Director for Assurance and Monitoring Officer. I just wanted to make members aware of some work we are doing around this. So Constitution and Governance Committee has led on the implementation of a company framework in the Constitution, and obviously following that officer review we will ensure our Constitution reflects any changes that are required. But also, Councillor Biscoe, thank you for referencing to the member induction and member development, all of which is governed by Constitution and Governance Committee, and I'll make sure I feed back those points in relation to that. And we have already got something on there around our kind of group of companies, our structure, but we'll take on board the external auditor comments in terms of shaping that for the future.
Thank you. Can I just make a comment because we're on this same subject? You say that you're going to update Treveth's management structure. I paraphrase. I presume that will then go through customer scrutiny to be looked at. And on page 59, the recommendation from GT is that Treveth's performance should be reported to the Cabinet to enable and make decisions. And the management responses will be reported in Q2 December. I just hope that reporting contains more substance than we normally see for the CoreServe group of companies, where we do not see a profit and loss account that I've always thought is off. And I've got hands up from the 151 officer. I'm not surprised.
Thank you, Tracy Langley, Chair. I am working on off the back of the report that the auditors have given us. We're working on a plan of how we ensure that the performance of our companies is open and transparent, but has the correct balance of what should be made in public and what should not be made in public, bearing in mind that they are companies. I actually don't have any problem with overview and scrutiny having a look at the framework by which we do that, but I'll make sure that that's part of the plan that we're looking at the moment.
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Biscoe, if you put your hand back up, is it on this same point? No, seems to be the answer. Right, I have Councillor Desmond next. Phil.
Sorry, I wasn't.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, Bert, were you coming? No, Bert's gone. Okay, Phil, carry on.
No. I was coming in. Sorry, I was trying to make a point. I beg your pardon. I was.
Carry on.
So sorry, Phil. The point I wanted to make was I've observed with great concern the lack of understanding of the governance mechanisms of all our companies over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, really, and it has concerned me greatly. Because I think it's had reputational impacts on both the council and on the companies. And I think it's incredibly important that the members of the council understand from the very earliest stages of the council that the company's primary duty is to provide a return to its shareholder. And in order to be able to do that, the companies must be able to manage their affairs in order to generate that return and to be able to perform properly. There is an extra responsibility around being the owner, and how we moderate that and undertake it is a different matter. But I do feel that it is really important to set out to members early on in the life of any council what the appropriate relationship is and the degree of autonomy that we need to be giving to our companies in order for them to be able to manage their affairs appropriately so that they can fulfil their fiduciary duty to the council. And until we get that right, and until we stop this sort of sniping away at the companies, which we see all the time, we are not going to make any progress as a group, which is important for us to do.
Thank you. Right, Councillor Desmond.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank Councillor Edgerton for some of the comments he's made on the table of figures. I picked up a number there which caused me some interest. But I'd like to just concentrate, if I could, on page 39 and the audit evidence and explanations section. I just have 2 simple questions for you here. You list some of the outstanding information you require from the officers. And question number 1 is this. Are those relating to matters to the date of the accounts, the end of March? Or are these matters you're seeking to satisfy yourself up to the date of your report on the 30th of November? And secondly, you talk about the Cornwall Airport as a going concern, but I wonder on the impact of the current financial problems with the airport in the valuation of the asset in county councils, in our council's books, at 34 million, following the effective collapse of the airport's operations, whether that 34 million still stands up.
Thank you, Councillor Desmond. So on the first item you raised, some of those items were outstanding and as at the time of writing, and they are all to do with the balances in the books for the 31st of March 2020. Apart from the cash flow forecasting, which we require from November 2020 for a following 18 months. It's part of the going concern work that we have to do. Having now looked at the airport and been satisfied that that's okay and doesn't impact on our group. It's not okay, but it doesn't impact on our group opinion. We still need to bottom out the future cash flows for the council itself. One bank letter from NatWest and a couple of loans and investments, and those are items that everybody is chasing. So they will be done. In terms of the airport, I think you're absolutely right, and that is why we challenged. I think we've been challenging on this because we have to, don't we, around valuations for a number of months now, and obviously watching the position with the airport as well. So the assumptions made are around what was happening on the 31st of March. Actually, 31st of March we were in lockdown. The airport actually still carried on doing things, and so it's quite an interesting topic for review, really. You still had your PSO in place, you still do. So there's a commitment there. So there's some kind of clear commitment as at the end of March that central government, etc., was still willing to fund the route into London in particular. But also what we looked at was what was the airport doing. It's very difficult to isolate, for instance, one hangar at a time, or move or take away the value of the runway or air traffic control, for instance, because the things got to be packaged together. And I think our view after looking at it was still open for emergencies. It was a diversionary airport. It still had to be there. I think air ambulance was using it. Certainly the military use it. So although there were no passenger flights into and out of London or, you know, Mallorca or wherever we go from Cornwall, the thing was still operating as such. And I think that's why we were satisfied that the material uncertainty around the value of the assets at the end of March is sufficient.
Could I just follow up on that just very quickly? Do you see any issues arising over your being able to sign off your 30th of November statement at the moment, bearing in mind some of these outstanding issues?
I don't think, Councillor Desmond, there is anything material in there that will stop us. I think we need to make sure we bottom out cash flows and understand them. We need to just have further discussions around what's happening with the inventory balance in the future. They're minor items, but something auditors have to ask. So no, I don't think so. We're in constant discussion with Mike, Russell and the team, and I know they are chasing the bank for those particular statements as well. So not over till it's over, but I can't see any material issues arising now.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Roy.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 points. I think the first point that I want to make probably would have been better made in the first session, but since we didn't really have too much time or opportunity, I'm going to have to do it now. And it is really just to examine the, and I'm sure this gets explained to us every year, and I'm sure I understand it and then somehow forget. But anyway, our balance sheet where we list our assets, which is we've had quite a few conversations so far this morning about our asset base and how it sits and how it then goes on to appear on our balance sheet. I have very grave concerns that if we value an asset such as the bridge at 123 million quid, that is not a realisable asset in any way, shape or sense of the word. But obviously it does appear as a value in our balance sheet. Now, my connected worry to this is how important or fundamental is our balance sheet value to our interpretation of our viability as an ongoing concern. Okay, so that's question number one, which is probably better placed in the previous session. Question number two is very much simpler, and I refer you to page 48, where you're talking about the governance of Treveth specifically, and it appears to describe the informal investment programme panel as a decision maker. And I just want to remind you that actually it isn't. It's an opinion giver and has no possibility actually to make a decision in this process.
Thank you. Right.
Yeah, thank Councillor, just on the balance sheet value, I think that's a really good question. My view is very clear. The balance sheet per se is not an indicator of the council's going concern when you have things like the Tamar Bridge and certain other assets that are effectively not really realisable. The most important thing to reflect on vis-a-vis the council is its reserves position and its debt. These are the most important things we need to be concerned about for all councils, not specifically Cornwall. And so whether your scores are worth 50 million combined, 100 million, 150 million, quite frankly, doesn't matter to anyone. It's of no relevance. You're not going to sell them to another schools provider, particularly. So the balance sheet is not something I would give a great deal of credence with in terms of the non-current assets and their impact on the balance sheet. You won't be in a better place because they're worth 3 billion rather than 2 billion. It makes no difference. So that would be my take on the first point. Geraldine, do you want to pick up on the Treveth point?
Are we suggesting therefore that we just amend that or change that, or is there more of a detailed observation?
Sorry, Jerry. Well, the observation is, I mean, it reads decisions on individual projects and investment begin at, and then it lists out the stages. but the IIPP is not one of the decision-making stages, so it's just an incorrect statement.
Okay, yeah, thank you. We'll amend that then, I think.
Yeah, I think the true position of that informed investment programme panel is that stuff goes there for comment, and its comments are taken into account by Cabinet, but it doesn't have a veto or a formal right of approval, and what Councillor Broy is saying is absolutely right.
Okay.
And if I just comment on Councillor Broy's first comment about valuations, I mean, the reason they're almost irrelevant is the wrong word, is because if you revalue something on the balance sheet, the other side of the entry is undistributable reserves. But it is kind of meaningless. You could put it in at £1 or £1 billion, it would still go to unrealisable reserves, and therefore hardly makes a difference at all in practice.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I've got no problem with that, and I understand the principles of there being a balancing figure in unrealisable reserves. But what I was more concerned about was, are we basing our decisions and interpretations of our liability as an ongoing concern on our balance sheet?
No. Okay. Are you happy? Yeah. Councillor Kenny.
Thank you. Yeah. A couple of questions, probably not too significant. I do welcome the fact that you're fixing the level of the reserves, or the council is fixing the level of the reserves. We don't want to get any surprises at the budget setting where people help themselves to reserves. That's not a good idea. Obviously, the accounts are dominated by COVID, because normally we would be talking about, well, you're 2.74% over what you budgeted to spend. Is this significant? Is this serious? What about your savings? You haven't achieved your savings target. I assume we haven't achieved our savings target. We're not doing that because it's all dominated by COVID. So I don't know if you've got any comments about the level of savings and whether we're going to achieve anything remotely like them. I'm interested in the use of COVID money. There's a lot of claims and counterclaims about what the money has been provided for. Obviously, we've used some of it for this year, for this last year. So will you be producing some sort of report for that, probably in the coming year, of how we are using the funding by government? Because that is, I think, quite an interesting point. And finally, I'm intrigued to see that we've already got an objection to the accounts in August, which I thought was fairly early. I don't know if you're able to share anything about what they were actually objecting to, and please tell me it's not Lobos again.
Okay, Councillor, thank you. I'll pick up on the COVID point and the objection. So on the COVID point, I think you're already starting to see National Audit Office, who are effectively the supreme audit agency of in the UK or in England. Sorry, and they are looking at issues related to COVID in terms of procurement, etc. And I'm fully expecting that as part of our 2021 audits, we and other auditors will be looking at broader arrangements as to how councils have dealt with grants, etc., related to COVID. I know that BAYS and MHCLG are also putting in processes into place, as are the Department of Media, Culture and Sport are also putting processes into place. So government, there's two-pronged attack really, one from government themselves in terms of what they're doing and what we as local auditors will be doing. And clearly one of the areas we'll be most interested in will be relating to the risk of fraud in grants, because obviously that period at the start of lockdown was a very fraught period for civil servants and for council officers and everyone to try and get all of that dealt with, and clearly that increases the risk of fraud. So that will certainly be of interest to us in 2021. On the objection relates to a planning matter, and we've already been received lots of information from council officers in that respect, and we're just considering what our next steps are in respect to that objection. What I would say is it doesn't have a specific impact on the 1920 audit of accounts, because sometimes objections do. So sometimes you have to hold value for money conclusions up because of objections. Sometimes even the whole financial statements are held up because of objections, but not in this particular case, in the sense it's not a material issue from our perspective, although obviously we need to work through the detail of it.
Okay.
Sorry, Councillor, I may have missed your first point. Sorry.
I was talking about whether we're worried about the level of savings that we have or haven't achieved over the it's our going concern. Or do we just forget about it now?
No. So I think the messages from our report are very clear. COVID has had a major impact on all councils. I think it's fair to say government have done a reasonable job in covering off the spending side of COVID that councils have incurred. I think there's more challenges on the income side, both in the 2021 year and beyond, that are challenging and somewhat difficult to predict. So I think COVID will have a very significant impact on council finances. You've got the impact of the spending review, which is going to be a one-year one, and we don't know precisely what that's going to say. So that has its impact as well. And we will be very clear with members that, you know, when you'll set your budget for next year, you need to have adequate reserves. You need to deliver savings, which will help you maintain adequate reserves. This year has been quite a unique year, and there would always be some mitigating circumstances for not achieving savings, but clearly going into the next year, that's a real priority, and we've commented on that in our report.
But you don't consider it's affecting our going concern status?
Not at this stage, at this moment, in respect of this report.
Thank you. Can I just make a comment on COVID? And this is turning to the narrative report in the accounts on page 106, which talks about council received 2 tranches of on-ring fence money totaling £34 million. It talks about a further report being taken to Cabinet in July. Well, of course, it's July 2020. Now, I know the problem with all these numbers is as soon as you print something, it's out of date. But I would rather, it would be nice if that narrative report could be updated, and perhaps within that narrative report, somebody could say this is the position as at 30th September or 31st of October, so it's clear what it takes into account and what has been announced subsequently, so the readers actually see where we are, because this is very out of date. That's just picking up on Councillor Kenny's point. Councillor Desmond, you have your hand up again. I hope it's a short point.
Yeah, it was a very short point. Page 48, to do with Treveth. The expectation is that Audit Committee will review the annual report for Treveth once it has completed a full year of trading. Any idea when we might see that, those accounts?
About November next year.
Any chance of a draft before then?
Not sure. When's its first full year? Tracy, do you know?
His first full year, I think, is the 31st of March.
We have seen accounts.
And we've seen a set of accounts for that. We've seen its first year, so it's just part of the shareholder report, not the shareholder report, the annual report.
No, we had accounts come to the meeting. Jerry,
you had it in, Chair. You had it in the July meeting.
Yeah, in the July meeting.
Yeah, and it was only 3 or 4 months worth of accounts because they were so small at the time. But you definitely saw them. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Right. Can I go with a few questions, possibly? On page 30, there is reference to the auditors identifying what looks like a number of problems with the IT system. 22 users with assigned additional access rights, 455 user accounts identified as having inappropriate critical IT security privileges, etc. And this, as I understand it, is all on our new Oracle system. So it's probably a question to management. What's gone wrong? Has it been put right? Management?
Thank you, Chair. Russell Ashman again. I will stand to be corrected by Jerry, but I don't believe it is on the new Oracle system. on that. It is on the old system, which is one of the reasons those changes were not implemented, due to the focus ensuring our method of correcting it was correcting it on the new system.
Jerry.
Chair, the issue is around super users. We call them super users, the type of people that have got assigned admin rights to do anything, I guess. And those are the findings that we're reporting to you. Our IT auditors did find those particular issues in the new system as well as the old system. But what we would say is actually that is quite common. And Paul may have a view in his travels around other councils, but this is quite common. So although we highlight it as a controls weakness, and we do believe it is, I think the important thing for Audit Committee to know is that we have applied various other levels of testing to our audit, particularly around journals, to make sure that where those findings have been found in both systems, there have been we haven't found any inappropriate postings of journals, etc. So there is some assurance there for members.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, I would just add to that we, Geraldine's right, we find this very often, and we obviously extend our testing appropriately or address our testing appropriately to deal with it. The reality is that there are quite a lot of mitigating controls, both in Cornwall and other councils, to deal with these things. For example, the budgetary control process and other processes. So, whilst ideally it's something that should be fixed, that it's not something. It's not a control weakness that we're sort of really worried about. It's just something that we recommend be addressed.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. On page 33, you commented on the debtor position, and in particular the number that are over 12 months old. Now, this came up to a previous audit committee meeting where we've asked officers to take it away and add it to, as well with a few other things, potential strategic issues of issues not being followed up on. So I'm almost making that comment just for the committee to know that this is something that's already been looked at. On page, sorry, I'm just following my notes here. You refer on page 38, and it's just slightly confusing here. You say, and this is in significant findings going concern, the council are committed to providing funding to the council companies. Is that effectively a guarantee? And if so, how long does that last for? Is that a short-term commitment or a 12-month commitment or what?
I'll comment first, Karen, and I don't know if either Tracy or Russell want to come in on the details. It takes various guises. I mean, obviously the companies are the councils, and the council are ultimately responsible for those. And I think over the summer there was a lot of debate and discussion around particularly the impact of COVID and how much working capital support, for instance, would be given. So you've got some increasing working capital. You've got 5.8 million, I believe, as agreed by Cabinet for the airport, and discussions are ongoing, I think, with central government still around anything else. And then you've got support that's been issued by the Chief Operating Officer for the companies as a whole in terms of their liability. But Tracy may be able to give more details.
Tracy, do you want to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I have numerous conversations with companies in order to satisfy ourselves and the company's auditors that because we are 100% owners, that we will underwrite whatever risks there might be, and we do have ongoing conversations about those risks and how much the council is willing to give a commitment to cover those should the risk come to fruition. We do that on an annual basis. So I think the answer to your question is generally 12 months, although in certain circumstances where necessary, we would make a commitment which may or may not be longer or shorter, but it's usually for the 12 months ahead.
Thank you. I've got one final question or observation. On page 67, these are unadjusted misstatements, in particular on inventory, which, as I understand inventory here to be land purchased for resale or transfer on, or stuff we're building on land, and the £2 million item of unadjusted stuff. Okay, that's not material, but I would just question the level of risk given the council's proposed investment in other land and houses, etc. And I don't know whether it's just a question of saying, is this something you, the auditors, see as an increasing level of risk?
A couple of points on that, Chair. That's our estimate, and we're not valuers. So that 2 million is our estimate of the difference between how you should value it and how it is currently valued on the balance sheet. And we've had to do quite a lot of work to satisfy ourselves that it couldn't ever be material or worst case scenario. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing, and again, Russell may have a view, my understanding, and we are finalising this with management, my understanding is your inventory as it sits in 1920 is probably not going to get much higher. But again, we need confirmation of that. My understanding is the 24 million you've got now will end up being transferred, and you may just end up with a residual amount. But again, Russell may have more detail on that.
Russell, do you want to comment?
I will comment on that. Yes, the element that is referred to as inventory at the moment is the land and buildings were bought in advance on the HDP programme before Treveth was set up, and will be transferring. They're deemed to be the legacy sites that the council bought before Treveth was set up. They will transfer to Treveth to be developed out, and in future in that area we expect, or the plan is that Treveth will purchase those assets themselves direct. So it was just timing issue of Treveth being fully operational and not able to purchase those sites in advance.
Right, thank you. I mean, there are presumably, and it's putting on the debate for today, stuff like the huge investment we've made into something like Langarth that becomes relevant as well. But I guess that's an issue for a future meeting. I've done with my questions. I don't know whether we want to move on to the accounts themselves now. And Tracy, I'm not sure who you want to do a presentation on the accounts, so we can raise questions on the accounts and then go back to the resolutions overall.
Thank you, Chair. I think the report is in Russell's name, so Russell is going to introduce the report, but hand over to Peter.
Thank you.
Sorry, not Peter, Mike.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll quickly introduce the report and run you through the report and how it refers to both what Grant Thornton have already discussed and the annual accounts that are in Appendix 4, and then I'll hand over to Mike to see whether there's any points of detail that he will want to bring in. But first of all, I will just apologise if I do repeat a little bit of what Grant Thornton already said, but you know, today you've got the annual accounts from 1920 in front of you. We have a legal requirement to produce these, and we produce them so that they're compliant with the SIPFA code for accounting local authorities and some of the other statutory documents we have to refer to and ensure that we comply with. And these accounts have been done on that basis, so they're fully compliant in our view with the legal framework that we have to live within. They are extremely complex, we don't get away from that. They are a very, very complex set of accounts. It takes our sort of management accounts and some of the budget reports that members will see during the year, which which are designed for ease of understanding by members and the public, and turns them into a very complex set of financial accounts. Included in the accounts are not only Cornwall Council, but we've also include, because we legally have to, the pensions accounts, albeit they have already been signed off by the pensions committee, and we also include 50% of joint committees, particularly at Mount Edgecombe and Tamar Bridge. I will just refer to the timescales. As we all know, normally we have to produce the accounts by the 31st of May and then send them to the auditors for their work, which they will normally have to complete and bring back to you by the 31st of July. Obviously, with COVID, the government changed those deadlines. They made the date that we have to submit the accounts to the 31st of August and the date for final sign-off to the 30th of November. As it's set out in the report, we did submit our accounts to the external auditors by the 30th of June, so we were only 1 month delayed from the original timescale, and that timescale is a relatively recent timescale brought in to speed up the process. So I think I was I'd like to sort of congratulate the team in being able to still, in the sort of backdrop of COVID, still produce the accounts in a very timely basis. So they went over on the 30th of June. Very challenging producing those accounts in the backdrop of COVID. Some of our QA processes were challenging. Some of the processes we'd normally do weren't as easy to do, and obviously probably led to a couple more errors than we would normally expect in our accounts. But still, I think we've produced a good set of accounts under that difficult circumstances. Also, obviously, a lot of work that we have to do now around the valuation work because of the extra focus that's now put on by the audit regulators on the value of assets does create a significant pressure to us, and there's an enormous amount of assets that we have to have valued on an annual basis and keep those values updated on a regular basis to ensure an accurate balance sheet. Hopefully the Redmond review may change that process, may take some of the pressure off the valuation of assets, as Paul mentioned from Grant Thornton. How much reliance can you put on the balance sheet in the way that some of those assets are valued? But again, it is a piece of work we have to do at the moment, and I think although we had some errors, we do it very well, and it's a fair reflection of the value of those assets based on the methods that we are required to value them on. I think also the audit work still isn't quite fully complete, but as Jerry has already stated, we don't think there's any issues that are outstanding that are material and will impact on the overall final opinion, which looks like it's going to be an unqualified opinion, which again I think is a really positive outcome. We produce these accounts, keep going back to it, but in difficult circumstances we've never had to do it in the backdrop of a pandemic. Not only is that remote working, which is difficult, but obviously people had we had a lot of competing circumstances, and obviously people had uncertainty in their own personal life. So I think to still produce a quality set of accounts is no mean achievement. Just going on to the accounts themselves, you will note the key points that are made, and as I say, I think if nothing else, members and the public should read the narrative report. The accounts are very, very detailed. We don't expect members of the public, unless they are fully qualified accountants with experience in local government accounts, to fully understand them. But the narrative report should be understandable to all and sundry. So the narrative report should be read by everyone and have a reasonable understanding of where we are financially. What we tried to lay out in there and the whole process is the council still a going concern? So that's one of the sort of, the assurance that members should be getting is, are we a going concern? Are we living within our means? Do we have an adequate level of reserves, usable reserves, and what our general fund reserve is? And what are our external auditors saying about us? One, about the quality of our control regime, the quality of last year's financial accounts, but also the quality in the value for money report of our financial planning for the future, albeit how much pressure there is on that at the moment with the pandemic. All those elements should go to giving audit committee assurance of where the council is. Is it in a good position financially? If you touch on last year, I'm answering a couple of those questions. Going concern work we've done, yes, we are a going concern. Last year we had a small overspend of £2.8 million. If you compare that as a proportion of our total spend, it's very, very small. It's very close to living within our means. Our level of reserves overall went up. Our usable reserves went up by 10 million. Our general fund reserve stayed pretty static around the 35 million mark, which is a good level for an authority this size, albeit I think we will be looking to try and increase that in our financial planning for the next 12 to 18 months, particularly with the uncertainty around the post-COVID world that we will be living with. But I think all that says that we are in a good position to face the challenges going forward. We've got a sound financial position. The external auditors, I think, concur with that agreement. So that is where we are in summary. As I say, the narrative report, please read it if you haven't already read it. I'll now hand over to Mike and whether he just wants to pick up a couple of key issues, and then we'll hand it over to questions from members of the committee.
Thanks, Russell. Mike?
Thank you, Chair. Mike Harris. I think the only thing I would add to Russell's quite comprehensive coverage of the main points, I think, really, is we spend a lot of time talking about asset valuations and estimates this morning, and that's obviously a key focus for the future. So just to give members a bit of assurance, really, that we're already working with our colleagues and valuers in the property service to see what we can strengthen and what we can put in place to give us additional assurance that the valuations at the end of March remain robust. So I thought it was just worth mentioning that is something that's obviously very high on our radar, and that we'll look to strengthen the arrangements for 2021 accounts and into the future. So that's probably all I could add.
Right, thank you. Jerry Daly has a hand up just to make some comment.
Thank you, Chair. I think Mike kind of took some of the words out of my mouth. I think the important thing, again, Paul will have a view, the important thing for me as an auditor is around whether you're a going concern. Are you achieving value for money? What are you doing about the general reserve, the funds, etc.? And can you provide the services that you want to provide to the demographics of Cornwall, rather than the value of the Tamar Bridge, the Wave Hub, or even your council dwellings? What I'd like to do is just say thank you to Mike, Russell and all their teams. This has been a really challenging audit for both sides, not pleasant sometimes. And we are operating in this unique world, and even though most of us live in Cornwall, we're still having to do this remotely, which isn't ideal. So I'd just like to, on record, thank Mike in particular, and Russell and the rest of the team.
Thank you. Right.
Yeah.
I think we'll take questions, please. I've got a couple, but I'll go last. Barry Jordan, you have your hand up.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Page 99 at the very bottom. I've been looking at this now for years, the 3.5 years that I've been on this council, and nothing's happened. If you look at connecting Cornwall, for instance, improve sea, road, rail, air and bus networks, when is that going to happen here in North Cornwall? We haven't seen anything in 3.5 years. Link bus and rail, well, we're never going to have any rail in North Cornwall, I don't think, so I don't think you can be linking buses with that. And broadband, enhance the broadband. There's people in my division that can't get broadband, and they haven't been able to get broadband. When are we going to do something about it? It's no good putting it in these papers and not doing anything. And that's what really annoys me. This part of North Cornwall, we're just left out on a limb. And believe it or not, the broadband cable comes in at Widmouth Bay, because I was on the district council when they paid £500,000 to bring it in there. But instead of the district council saying, use Cornwall first, they sent it up to Birmingham. But that's not the point. The point is, these healthy Cornwall, homes for Cornwall, green and prosperous Cornwall, it's there, but nothing is being done in this part of the county. Tintagel is the second most deprived area in Europe, according to the European map that came out a little while ago, yet nothing is being done. When are we going to see some of this action that we're being promised here in North Cornwall?
Councillor Jordan, I think they're very reasonable points to make. They are, to the extent that they are referring to stuff within the statement of accounts, of course they're relevant, but I'm not sure you'll get an answer to your questions from this committee. But I think they're fair points to make, but they should be taken on elsewhere.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Desmond. Philip, are you with us? Are you muted?
Yes, I am. Sorry about that. The broadband issue that Councillor Jordan raised impacted me for a moment. I've got a question which is reasonably specific, and it's to do with the issue of MRP policy. If I could just turn to page 199. On the papers, there's reference to the MRP/loans fund principle, and I was wondering what the council's policy was on determining what that calculation should be. I'll keep it as simple as that for the moment before I come back.
Tracy Langley, do you want to try and take that question?
Thank you, Chair. It's Russell's area of expertise, so I'll leave him to do that.
Well, that's done. Russell.
Yeah, I'm just getting to the page now. Our MRP policy, yes, the MRP policy is the way that we reflect our level of our loans in our revenue account on an annual basis. So it's the amount that we set aside to repay the loans. Our current policy is we put them over the life of the asset. Most of the asset lives are between 40 and 50 years. So most of it is setting aside the loans over that period, approximately between 2 and 2.5% per annum.
If I could come back on that, I understand the minimum revenue position concerns the amount set aside to repay external debt.
Yeah.
And the opening and closing position shown on page 199 is for 1819 and 1920 the same, 24.564 million and 25.963 million respectively. The Local Government Act 2003 requires the council to have an MRP policy and to update it at full council each year. And this is under government's guidance notes appended to the Local Government Act at paragraph 18. So my query is expanding on the basic principle of whether we have a policy or not is what is the current agreed policy, as I've asked. I couldn't find it anywhere. I don't know if you can point it to me. And when was it last voted on? I understand the rules require the policy in terms of about 4% of non-housing capital finance requirements, or by an asset life method, which I think you just described in terms of a depreciation process. But there's nothing I can see or find that confirms what that is. There are other approved procedures, and clearly you're focusing on depreciation. If you could help me with where that is and whether our process is being properly followed through a vote on this, I'd be grateful. But then one small little question: what is the difference between the financial years of 1,327,000?
Okay, last question I'll leave to Mike. He hopefully will have the detail. In terms of the council's MRP policy, it is contained within its treasury management strategy, which is voted on every year as part of setting the budget. The last time the MTFP policy was changed was last year. It was done in the mid-term treasury management review, which went to scrutiny committee, cabinet and full council. So it's contained within the treasury management documents, either within the annual strategy or the mid-year review.
Do you accept that it should be voted on by full council as per the Government Act?
It was. Yes, we do that. Every year it is voted on as part of, it's contained within the treasury management strategy, and every year full council vote on the treasury management strategy to recommend and to approve it. But
I couldn't see the policy yet. Can you point it to me?
I can't.
Councillor Desmond, we're getting quite detailed here. I'll back up what Russell just said. The way the question was phrased, it came back to my mind that yes, it is voted on every year. I think in terms of the details of the policy and finding it, if Russell could email you separately with it as to where we find it, there's probably like great trouble finding stuff within council documents.
Yeah. Okay, we'll do that.
Okay.
Mike, do you know what is the £1 million movement?
Well, it will vary from year to year. So we have a great big schedule of assets that have been financed through the capital programme by borrowing, and we have a life against each one of those specific assets. So we have a great big spreadsheet with all the assets down the side and their life across the top. So then we charge, as Russell said, we charge MRP based on the life of the asset and the value of the asset. So over a number of years, some of those assets will fall out of that spreadsheet because they've effectively been paid off, and other assets will be added in to those details because they will come into use from the capital programme. So that figure can vary from year to year, and it can go either way. If we suddenly have a large number of assets that become operational from the capital programme, then you may see that figure increase, and especially if those are assets with short lives. But equally, if we have a year in particular where there's a number of assets that fall out of that schedule because we've paid off effectively the borrowing on those assets, then that figure can drop off. So it's a case of assets coming on, some assets coming off, so the figure will vary from year to year. If you're interested in seeing the detail, I'm quite happy to show you how we come up with the figures, Councillor Desmond.
Yeah, that would be of interest. Thank you. Thank you.
Also, just coming in there, the other point that members full council did approve last year was that on some of the historic loans, they increased the asset life from 40 to 50 years. So one of the reasons why there's a slight reduction last year is the MRP life on historic loans was increased, and I say that was voted on and approved as a separate recommendation at full council.
Thank you.
Councillor Biscoe, I'm not quite sure whether your hand's up or what.
Hand is most definitely up, Chairman.
Thank you. Please carry on.
And I'm not muted. Well, so firstly, could I just extend gratitude to both the teams who've got us to the point where we've got a very lengthy, quite complicated but cogent report, and in very, very challenging times, although not so challenging for 1920 as I suspect they're going to be for 2021, to have a set of accounts which actually of themselves are quite reassuring. So that's all to the good, and thank you all very much for that. I understand how difficult it must have been, and I think that everybody's still talking to each other and everybody's as patient as they ever were. I think it's a testament to the professionalism of everybody involved. So I wanted to ask a question, or I think actually I don't want to ask a question. I want to ask an opinion, really. It seems to me that when one steps back from these accounts and one looks at the position of the council at 31st of March 2020, one has to draw the view that even though we're living in a period where we're almost in negative interest rates, that the level of debt which the council is running and is actually increasing as we go by, and the level of debt to which it is committed, which it hasn't as yet drawn down, seems to me to be a bit of a risk when you consider the stresses on our revenue income. So we're not quite sure what's going to happen about the business rate pilot, or how much of that is going to be available to us, or whether in fact the return on us collecting business rates is going to be greater or less than the old central system. We have increasing service costs, most particularly in the care sector, but I think you will see that when we come to become active in terms of infrastructure again, which I don't think is too far down the road now, as it were, then we'll see an increase in costs there. That'll be labour costs and probably materials costs. And then we've got all this business about our collateral, which is that we've got a whole pile of assets, but quite a lot of them don't actually hold much value in terms of being able to borrow against, because they're non-realisable assets. And it seems to me that in considering the council's overall position and the council's sort of ongoing financial strategy, is that we have sort of bolted ourselves into a strategy of borrowing, and not really asking the question from time to time, can we afford to continue doing it in the circumstances as they evolve? And I would be interested to know whether the auditor in particular feels that we challenge ourselves on that matter as much as we might.
Thank you. That's one for the auditors. Tracy Langley, her hand up as well, but if the auditors want to comment first.
So Geraldine, are you okay to pick that one up?
Sorry, Councillor Bishop, what was your concern in particular? Could you is it around interest rates and the issue around liquidity and viability, or is there something else on your mind? Sorry, I just wanted some clarity around the specific bit.
I think I'm asking a Bert Biscoe type big general question, really.
Thought so.
That is thanks. They drift in and out, between the ears. I think my point is that we look at these things every year, and we have a medium-term financial strategy that sort of rolls coastally along, and it doesn't never have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Really, we never get to the end of the medium-term financial plan and say how have we done, because we add the next 3 years on, and on it goes. And I feel that we have shifted from probably a too lower borrowing strategy to one in which we are a bit gung-ho. Now, I mean, I know it's fashionable to be gung-ho about borrowing. You only have to look at the Chancellor of the Exchequer to see that. But the situation is that you have to borrow within your means. And my question is whether, given all the stresses and strains that we have and all the responsibilities we have and so on, whether actually we are beginning to test those means, the bounds of our borrowing capacity.
Yeah, so generally, and obviously Sophie has got a hand up, generally you have caps in terms of your borrowing and what you're allowed to borrow, and certainly the council are well within that. I think the other observation would be affordability. We just talked about MRP, for instance, affordability, and the treasury management strategy that has to get approved, which links not just your borrowing but also the return on your investments. And I think I'm right in saying over the last, well, not last year, but the last few years, the council have had kind of benefited from some of those investments that they've made in the future. So my answer back is, sorry, it appears woolly, is more around those particular areas rather than specific. I would point out also that if we all remember the issue with Lobos, the council did get themselves into a bit of an issue around some particular loans that really weren't great or ideal for them, and got themselves out of those. And I think that that has to be factored in when you think about the practice that the council are adopting going forward and the safe type of borrowing that they're taking on, rather than some of the more exotic things that were done 5, 6, 10 years ago.
Okay.
Thank you. So Tracy Langley, you want to comment as well?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to give you some reassurance, more than anything, Councillor Biscoe, you are absolutely right, and Paul referred to it earlier that the debt ratio is one of those important indicators as to whether or not the council is a going concern. So we have to take that into consideration always. So I would say that as part of kind of my professional team's responsibility is to ensure that the financial strategy of the council is the right one and that it's affordable. And there's always a balance between what you spend your revenue on, whether or not you spend that on borrowing or whether you spend it on services. And I think about that every single day. So we have a prudential code, so we're allowed to borrow prudentially. So we can never go above a capped limit anyway. But it is something that myself, Russell and Ellie talk about on a regular basis as to whether the amount of borrowing that we have is the right level of borrowing, given all of the other things that we have to do. And it is an absolute choice. But every year, as part of the financial report that goes as part of the budget setting set of documents, you will see in there our financial strategy and what that looks and what we've assessed when we're looking at our financial strategy and the level of borrowing. So you should always seek to look for that type of conversation in those reports.
Thank you. I do sincerely hope, Tracy, that every now and again you give yourself a day when you don't worry about the council.
No, I don't. Every single day I worry about council
Christmas Day and your birthday. That's awful. What a dedication to duty.
It keeps me up at night.
Oh my God, Tracy.
Even worse.
Heavens above.
Sorry. Okay.
Sorry, asked.
You basically answered, I think. Now, just on that point, before I come in with my questions, I do wonder whether we look deeply enough at most of our borrowings are for property, land, building, etc., and whether we're looking deeply enough again in a post-COVID market where we don't know where we are. It's not a question requiring an answer today, but whether we shouldn't be rethinking this and rethinking the presumptions in particular made within Treveth in terms of its business plan, which is what backs up how we the council are going to pay the interest on the principal of our borrowings off. And it's a question for a different day. If I might, I've got a few questions or comments on the account. Starting on page 101, and there's a mistake in the accounts which goes through. Page 101 that shows the Cornwall Council Group, and it shows Cormac Contracting Limited as being owned directly by Cornwall Council. It isn't, it's owned by Corserve Limited. Officers tell me that this will be corrected in the final version of the accounts. It just shows you how many hours I spend reading these things. On page 106 is the point I made earlier about can we update the grant money, etc., and put an as of date so we can see what's coming in terms of grants from government, because the numbers in here, this is the COVID note, are very out of date. On page 113, and this is a fairly chunky question, I think, we talk about how this is in the section marked reserve movements, and it's how we've used the COVID-19 support grants which came in before the year end, and it seems that we've used £800,000 of that within the year ended 31st of March 2020 to mitigate loss of income at Cornwall Airport Limited. But in reality, lockdown didn't happen until the 23rd of March. So on the face of it, it suggests to me we lost £800,000 in 7 or 8 days. And I actually wonder whether that's the correct treatment of that, and whether in reality the the loss we were mitigating in that period wasn't a lot more caused by the demise of Flybe. I've got one more point, but I'll stop there because that one demands an answer from somebody. The auditors have a view on this question?
I can probably help, Chair.
I hope somebody can.
Okay. So it's a bit of an assessment, of course, but in 1920, whilst we went into lockdown at the end of March, actually the impact of loss on the airport happened before that, because the flights in and out, and it's mostly on Flybe, had been interrupted. So there's an assessment that there's 3 months of lost income, around about 100k a month, and a bad debt for CAL of 500k, which was assessed at the time. So that's the 800k.
But sorry, and how can a bad debt be attributed to COVID? Because Flybe was going bust almost come what may. It's really a question for the. I mean, it's kind of a question I'm posing to the auditors. Really, are you happy with that treatment? Because I'm twitchy. I'm not sure that Jerry's trying to talk. I think she is.
I am trying to talk, Chair, as always, trying to talk. Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think about Flybe going bust. That happened obviously well before COVID impact. But I think, Tracy, I'm right in saying that those monies, that 800,000, isn't attributable, wasn't given to the council to be assigned for anything in particular. It could still be used. So there were no restrictions put on it or conditions put on it, for instance.
No, at that point, the COVID grant was the first of the COVID grants was an amount of money to cover loss, and it wasn't specific. And actually, we had already notified the government, and that's nationally, that we had made losses that was an impact of COVID. Whether or not that was an impact of lockdown or not is a kind of another matter. But as a matter of COVID entering into the sort of national system, that it did impact on 1920, and there were no restrictions as to how we could use it. But it does reflect what we put on the returns back to government.
Yeah, and I think also, I could be wrong, but that debt that was recovered in the end through a claim, wasn't it?
Some, yeah, partly. But that would have been in the following year in terms of accounts.
Yeah. Sorry, Chair, I don't know if that helps then.
I guess in the end, if the auditors are happy with it, I felt I should raise it. I've got one final question, and this is one very much for the auditors, because it's note 30 on page 192, which is one that always agitates, quite rightly, the taxpayer. Exit packages for staff leaving the council. I think I've asked the question before. Is this something you look at specifically to make sure that everything is absolutely in order?
Yeah, it is. We've actually tested that particular area there.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions on the accounts, etc.? If not, we can go back to the recommendations. I don't know what anybody else thinks, but I'm following on from what Councillor Biscoe is saying. I wonder what, as well as changing recommendation 4, we couldn't add a new recommendation along the lines of the accounts team and Grant Thornton are to be commended on getting these reports out in difficult circumstances. I don't know if any of you wants to comment on that. Well, if I propose it, will somebody second it?
Yes, I'll second it, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Biscoe.
In that case, Chairman, you don't need a seconder, but still.
Can I just query that, Chair, because it will obviously be recorded in the minutes, but is it appropriate to make it a recommendation? Where we're basically approving the accounts rather than a very genuine and heartfelt acknowledgement, which is absolutely right.
To be honest with you, I would actually, because we come up with recommendations, it's very weird as opposed to resolutions. I would rather see something on the front of it. Mel has a hand up and may be able to help us.
Yeah, so thank you, Chairman, for bringing me in there. So, yeah, really, I think it's a matter for the committee as to whether they want this recommendation of the committee to be noted. Generally, we don't usually do these types of recommendations, as you know, but you will recall that in our cabinet report, we had a similar recommendation for the work that's been done around COVID, and I think it's just that recognition in exceptional circumstances. So it's really a matter for the committee, but you are right, Councillor Kenny, as a general, we wouldn't usually have these types of recommendations.
I think
I've got no problem if that's an acceptable thing, because I think it's something we should acknowledge. So I've got no problem with that. I just want to check that.
In that case, looking at the recommendations that I read out before, the recommendations, I don't think I need to read them out again. Recommendations 1, 2, and 3 would be as printed. Recommendation 4.
Just one comment, if I may, Chairman.
Yes.
I wonder if there should be something in there to say subject to report, final report of the auditors issued on the 30th of November 2020.
Where are you? In which recommendation?
On the recommendations at part 2. So recommendations are endorsed subject to report the auditor's report to be issued on the 30th of November.
I think that's a separate point. I think we are being asked to endorse the audit findings report presented to us today. So I think I'm happy to leave it as it is. We're not being asked to endorse a future document. If you're okay with that.
Right, so the going concern statement to be Chief Operating Officer is based upon what we have now, or will it be based upon the report that's issued by Grant Thornton on the 30th of November?
With respect, Chairman, what we're doing is approving the 2019-20 accounts. Closure date, March the 31st, 2020. So the going concern statement relates to that year.
There are outstanding queries and issues.
I think, Councillor Biscoe, we could get into lovely philosophical arguments as to when a going concern statement is relevant, and we could sit here all days arguing with the auditors. I certainly am happy with those motions as drafted, subject to changing 4 by adding after audit committee with the following words: with the audit committee taking assurance from the reports and information received from officers, and then adding a new number 6 recommendation that the accounts team and the auditors be commended on producing the accounts and related documents so efficiently in difficult circumstances.
Seconded.
Thank you. If there's no more comment.
Excuse me, I'd be grateful if you could explain what your addition to number 4 is trying to achieve, because what we're doing in the rest of the body of it, as we are approving for signing by the council's chief operating officer and the chair of the audit committee.
Yeah,
but it's proving, presumably, we have taken our assurance.
Councillor Biscoe, I note what you say. If you look at the details in the letter of representation, you know, and if you just say to me, would you approve it? That to me suggests that I am approving it as if I can make each of those reps myself, and I'm jolly sure that none of us can, which is why there's an expression to do with covering one's behind or something. I'd like to put those words in because in the end, the fact of the matter is, we do take assurance from the work performed by all the officers, internal audit in particular, throughout the year, and then our own subsequent inquiries. But our basic source of information is what comes from the officers, and that's what I'm trying to stick in by putting that in. It's not limiting our approval at all. It's covering our backsides, really.
I think we're making a bit of a meal of this, aren't we?
I think so, yeah. Let's just agree my amendment.
But the assurance comes from the external officer, the external auditors, rather than the officers.
Say that again. Sorry.
Well, our assurance, I'm picking my assurance up from the reports of the external auditors, not so much from what the officers are saying, which is obviously very, very helpful, but it is of the assurance we get from the external auditors.
Sorry,
So I think you're saying you want to put, Councillor Desmond wants to put in a comment that says subject to a satisfactory audit report from comments from the external auditors.
No, hang on, can we go back? We're about to get very confused here. The only amendment I'm discussing is the amendment to the letter of management representation, which is the one that Cornwall Council give to the auditors. That's the only amendment I'm discussing.
And what do you want to say?
After audit committee, with the audit committee taking assurance from the reports and information produced to it by officers. And it is something I've discussed with the monitoring officer previously.
Okay, let's. I can't see it makes a lot of difference, but we're just wasting time discussing a few words.
Right, thank you. Well, allow me to waste some time. I think I already read what I wanted to, what I was suggesting for 6, but you want me to repeat it? Right, in that case, may we have a proposer and a seconder, please?
I'll propose.
A seconder?
Seconding.
Thank you, Mr. Desmond. So, recommendations 1, 2, 3, 4 as amended, 5, and then 6, the new one. Helen Snell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So members are asked to vote for, against or abstain. So Councillor Harris.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Biscoe.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Desmond.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Edgerton.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Ecclesmith.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Jordan.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Kenny.
4.
Thank you. Councillor LeBoy.
4.
Thank you. And Councillor Wood.
4.
That's all agreed, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. The next item on the agenda is any other business the chairman considers to be of urgency. I'd just like to say something here, and I hope it's not controversial, and it certainly isn't meant to be, in relation to grants made to houses registered for business grants and whether or not they should have got them. Members will have seen an email I wrote on this. I was proposing to raise it as a formal matter of urgency in view of the new round of grants coming out. And my concern was that, in my opinion, there was an exclusion if the owner of a property registered for business rates and in receipt of a grant use the property for personal use. There is some disagreement. Officers take the view that my opinion is wrong, but, and I'm going to be very careful what I say here before the monitoring officer shouts at me, it's not completely free from doubt. The reason I'm not raising it as a formal urgency issue is that that exception for personal use is not in the current grant schedule. So the position today is there's nothing to raise as an urgency matter, but I am told that officers will write to the relevant department in London to make sure that their interpretation of the rules of the first grant, which meant that you weren't excluded if you used your business let second home for personal use, is correct. And that's a simple statement. Thank you. And having said that, unless anybody wants to make an observation on that, and please God no. Thank you. Any other comments? Otherwise, we'll finish the meeting. Thank you.
Well done, Chairman.
Meeting over. Thank you all very much for your time. Thank you to our external people and the officers. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Chairman. Well done.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good job.